Let's talk about the BBC. Obviously 500 of them, of the staff there, are probably ensconced right now down in Glastonbury. They always send virtually every member of staff from the BBC, as far as I can work out, down to the West Country for that pop festival. They seem to think it's the biggest event on the face of the planet, idiots. But what I want to talk about is that BBC staff have been told in new updated editorial guidelines that they should be willing to represent unpalatable opinions and minority views that some people might find offensive. So journalists at the BBC have been told in new guidance that if you have a story that encompasses opinions that some might find offensive, some might find unpalatable, you should still do that story. I mean, to the average journalist, that's just gobbledygook. Of course you should. You know, who are they saying will find these opinions unpalatable or offensive? My guess, BBC journalists. That's why they haven't been covering these stories. They've been censoring the stories that they personally find offensive and unpalatable. You know, stories that are pro-Israel and anti-Hamas. You know, that's the sort of thing that the BBC finds offensive, isn't it? You know, so what is going on at the state broadcaster? It gets more ridiculous by the day. Let's talk to the chief of Defund the BBC, Rebecca Ryan. Hi, Rebecca.
Kevin.
First of all, let's talk a little bit about Glastonbury. I've just been talking to John Robb, who's going down there tomorrow. He's a fan of it. As I was saying, I just don't get it. Why anybody would want to go to that Worthy farm to be packed into a sort of rain-sodden field with 250,000 other people is beyond me. But that isn't the point. Why does the BBC send 500 staff every year? Why is it such a big deal for the BBC?
It's well, I think we said this last year, didn't we, and the year before. It's the annual jolly for the to go and schmooze with random celebrities that bands that most people don't care about or want to hear from. But it's just it's a woke mecca, isn't it? Glastonbury.
Yeah, and I know that BBC staff, I mean, they jostle, it's like, yeah, I've got the Glasgow ticket, so 500 of them head down there. A couple of years ago, or I think 3-4 years ago, I think it was like 750 or something. That is an enormous expense, at BBC licence fee payers' expense. Enormous amount of money. And then they play it round the clock, on about 7 different channels. And they justify it, saying, it's a massive event that appeals to all ages. But it's not. It's kind of weird, isn't it? It's a sort of BBC fetish.
It absolutely is, but it takes you back to that year where they were all singing "Oh Jeremy Corbyn," the tune of the White Stripes, Seven Nation Army, and that's kind of peak Glastonbury, and that's what the BBC's there for. That's what they're hoping to capture, that kind of left-wing metropolitan elite sentiment there. Going to come up with the most woke message on stage, and I think that's what they're desperately flooding down there to try and capture and portray to the rest of the country, because this is what we should be believing and what we should be thinking. So yeah, it's just an absolute epitome of their woke agenda, and it's no wonder that they all get to go down there and have a good old time.
Do you reckon they'll have the guts to broadcast Kneecap's performance? Kneecap, of course, this controversial Northern Irish hip-hop trio. One of them is facing charges of waving a Hezbollah flag, allegedly at a concert in Kentish Town here in London. He denies that, so we don't know the outcome of that case yet. But, of course, they are also notorious for shouting from the stage, particularly at a concert in Belfast. The only good Tory is a dead Tory, kill your local MP. So these are the kind of sentiments that Kneecap are famous, notorious for. Now Glastonbury have stuck to their guns and said they're still going to remain on the schedule. They will be playing their gig. The BBC are keeping their powder dry on this. They say we'll make editorial decisions as the concert unfolds. Do you think they'll have the guts to put Kneecap on?
Oh, I think they desperately want to, don't they? They desperately want to, but I think they're probably umming and ahhing, particularly with this next story about sort of, what they're allowed to cover these days. I think, yeah, it will be interesting to see but I think they're probably desperate to do so.
Yeah, but my guess is they'll bottle it. They'll get scared. They're right now they're acting kind of tough. Yeah, we might play. It's up to us. We'll make a decision later. Well, I bet you the decision they make is the cowardly one. And Kneecap, I'm personally, I'll be distraught. I won't be able to see Kneecap now as I watch 7,000 hours of Glastonbury over the next few days on every single BBC channel to the exclusion of everything else. Very strange. Let's move on to a story that emerged today, which again, I mean, I would say it's strange, but it's BBC, isn't it? It's BBC. This is Planet BBC, peak BBC. Right, the BBC staff have been told in new editorial guidelines that they must be willing to represent unpalatable and offensive opinions. By that, I suspect, I mean, I don't understand why any journalist would have to be told that. I mean, of course you represent offensive and unpalatable opinions. It's not our business. And by the way, who decides what's offensive and what's unpalatable? You present the news, you let the readers or the audience make up their own minds. That's how you do it in the adult world. I suspect what this means is BBC staff, BBC editorial staff, have been told now to cover stories that they find unpalatable, offensive. Like, as I just said, stories that are pro-Israel and anti-Hamas, that kind of thing. Would you agree with my interpretation?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing is that in the Royal Charter, it says, and it has said, since the beginning of the licence fee, that they are obliged to represent all parts of the UK. And as we know, any, of these, the pretty standard opinion outside of the M25 is hugely offensive to who work at the BBC. Saying that only women can get pregnant is hugely offensive. And so for the BBC, it was refreshing this week to see that they didn't actually sack that news presenter who corrected.
Yeah, they're the pregnant people. And she just went, her name is Martine Croxall, I think. And she just went, women. which in the BBC, that was a seismic event. You can imagine people go, what did she just say? What did she... It's pregnant people, it's not women. That's BBC for you, isn't it?
Exactly, but these are the kinds of things that would be seen as offensive within the BBC, and so it's shocking that they have to even be told that you're going to have to say these kinds of things and report these different views from people when it's the average views of people outside of the M25.
Now, just to quote some of this BBC guidance, this new updated editorial guidance, here's a couple of paragraphs for you. It says, on occasion, now here we go. Yeah, the corporation is committed to reflecting a wide range of subject matter and perspectives across its output. On occasion, that will include attitudes and opinions which some may find unpalatable or offensive. As I say, this would be what they're talking about there is opinions and outlooks that BBC journalists find offensive and unpalatable. And it's extraordinary how far the BBC newsroom has fallen. Because we know what we're talking. They're a bit, like, I tell you, for example, what was an opinion that they found unpalatable and offensive? It was supporting Brexit, leaving the EU. And they pursued their own feelings about that with such vigour, with such passion. They were so pro-Remain that they ended up getting censured, and they ended up having to admit that the BBC was outrageously biased throughout the Brexit debate. And I predict after, God willing, the Gaza conflict ends, the BBC will have to admit that it was outrageously prejudiced and biased against Israel throughout that war. Would you accept that? Would you agree with that?
And we've seen week in, week out the BBC taking reports from people who clearly are extremely biased within the war zone and just reporting it as fact, and it's stirring up real trouble for Jewish people in the UK. You know, this throughout this most recent wave of conflict in Gaza and Israel. The BBC has behaved in an awful way and completely against its charter obligations to deliver journalistic excellence. You know, it's taking up tidbits from members of Hamas. It's using voices from people within Hamas in its documentaries and what have you. You know, it's behaved in an awful way. So yeah, you're absolutely right. When hopefully this wave of the conflict comes to an end, the BBC will be shown to have behaved awfully in this situation. But you know, coming back to the point about them having to report things that are offensive to people. I mean, every single thing is offensive to somebody nowadays. You know, there is nothing you can say that is not offensive. But if the BBC, as you say, is trying to now say things that are potentially offensive, they're talking about with their own people, their own sort of metropolitan party set. Things that might offend them.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I mean, during the Brexit debate, I'll tell you, you know, I can imagine. No, in fact, I know BBC journalists. You know, they were leaving Nigel Farage on the cutting room floor because they found his Brexit opinions unpalatable and offensive. That's what this is about. That's what this guidance is about. It's not that you must encompass others, you know, other people's offensive and palatable opinions. What it's trying to tell you, or to tell BBC journalists, is you must rise above your own prejudices, rise above what you find offensive and unpalatable, and try to report that in an unbiased kind of a way. That's the undercurrent here. That's what this is about, because this is what BBC journalists do, and what they've. Well, they didn't used to be like this, but I think it probably started badly during Brexit, where they decided it was up to them to decide what was right and wrong and to shape the news towards what they wanted. So they wanted to remain, they wanted Brexit to fail, and that's how they directed all their journalism. Utter disgrace, and they had to admit it. They had to admit we were biased. We mustn't do that again. Now I give you the Gaza conflict, and I'll tell you, Rebecca, my feeling in the future, they'll have to do exactly the same again. You know, as I always say about Gaza and the BBC's coverage, you know, this is not a debate. It's not, oh, do you think the BBC might be, you know, the BBC say they've been impartial, but let's have a debate about that. Do you think they have that? It's not a debate. It's an absolute fact that they have been appallingly prejudiced and biased against Israel, isn't it? It's obvious.
Absolutely. I mean, we can see that day in, day out from the coverage, from the October massacre, that the BBC have reported in an extremely biased way. And yeah, for the sort of this diktat to come down to say they have to report things now that are offensive, this is in their charter. They should have been doing this throughout, and they're kind of trying to spin this as some kind of positive PR that now they're taking the reins. But they have always been obliged to do this. So you know, that's the thing that really is upsetting about this news story, because they are obliged to do this. That's how they're able to tax the British people for watching live broadcast TV, and yet they've been ignoring it all of this time. And as you say, the people of Israel have been suffering from this biased reportage, but also the Jews across the UK have been suffering as well.
And do you think that BBC journalists find it unpalatable and offensive to call Hamas what they are, a terrorist organisation? Is that the sort of thing that BBC journalists find offensive, that when governments, including Britain, prescribe that organisation as a bunch of terrorist toe rags, that and say they are forbidden, that the BBC, journalists at the BBC, find that prescription, the forbidding, the illegalising of Hamas? Do you think they find that offensive and unpalatable, and that's why to this day they refuse to call Hamas exactly what they are, terrorists?
Absolutely, no, I'd 100% agree with you on that, Kevin. I think they just can't bring themselves to do it, can they? And it remains to be seen if that will change. But I do not hold out much hope that they will start stating fact on that one.
It's disgusting, isn't it? It's disgusting. You know, what that Hamas lot did on October the 7th, and our state broadcaster that we pay for is full of journalists who refuse to call those violent scumbags terrorists. They won't call them terrorists. In fact, to be fair, they don't often go this far, but I think probably in the newsroom at the BBC they call them freedom fighters or something like that. And there we're looking at the little Gaza boy who told his story, his struggle, in that fabulous documentary that the BBC treated us with, failing to mention that he was the son of the Deputy Agriculture Minister of Hamas, the son of a terrorist. They didn't tell us that, did they?
They absolutely did not. And this is the thing with the BBC. They just think they can get away with this. And they've just mistranslated what was said as well. When they were talking, they said that it was about Zionism or against Israel, but actually the translation was Jews. You know, it was a jihad against the Jews. So, you know, this is the problem for the BBC, is that they just take it upon themselves. It's a campaign organisation rather than a sort of a bias news reporting, and that's what people are sick to death of paying for.
See, here's, I think, the essence of the problem with the BBC newsroom, which has fallen far and is falling far. It really is shocking to see what's happened to the once genuinely impartial BBC newsroom, which was renowned for fair reporting around the world. Here's the problem. The Director General, Tim Davie, is not a journalist. Never was. So he has no understanding of editorial. And the head of news, Deborah Turnis, is useless. There's your two problems, right?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's just they're making mistake after mistake after mistake, and we're the people that are forced to pay for it if we watch any live broadcast TV. And we just have to get rid of the licence fee in order to make any change happen. But with the Labour government in place, we can't see that happening anytime soon.
Exactly right. I mean, if they got rid of the TV licence, which of course they should, it's a ludicrous anachronism. You know, if you don't pay for Strictly Come Dancing, you go to jail. It's ridiculous. But if they got rid of that and they said, right, it's subscription, or even we'll take adverts or something, then the audience can make their minds up, you know, say, well, you know, I rather like this very biased anti-Israel reporting, so I'll pay my subscription and I'll watch the BBC. You can make that decision. But the fact that it's kind of compulsory, that we have to buy this licence, and therefore we then have this sort of warped, twisted journalism foisted upon us, that is not acceptable, and something should be done about it, and something should be done about it fast. Meanwhile, I've got to go, Rebecca, because I've got to go and watch 47 hours of Glastonbury. I can't wait. Good to talk to you, as always. That's Rebecca Ryan, Director of Defund the BBC.